Today we're going to talk about the most common mistakes that amateurs and pro mountain bikers make, and we've got a guest. We've got Olly Morris, who's a professional skills coach for amateurs but also for pro downhill racers, and he's a team manager, so knows all about the mistakes that these riders are making. Okay, Olly, you've done a lot of racing yourself. Your day-to-day is with your punter, your average mountain bike. We work with pros as well, so I guess you've got a good overview of the mistakes that these mountain bikers are making. Let's start with the amateurs. What's the number one most common mistake you see amateurs making?
Number one most common mistake, I suppose, with like the evolution of bikes over the past kind of 10 years really now, the bikes have changed. They've got longer, geometry has changed, absolutely everything has changed on them. And I think there's one thing that people do is we're not using them properly. And when I say that, like where your weight is as a rider is probably the most important thing. Like that interacts with the suspension, how you get grip in the tyres, how you can use the brakes. So the number one thing I'm seeing is people just often their weight's a little bit too far back. I think the reason why they do it is because there's like a nervousness, you know, like if I'm further back, I'll less likely hit my head or go over the bars. But the true thing is the further back you are, I always say, the faster you can end up going forwards. So yeah, most common mistake for sure, just being a bit too far back on the bike.
So how do you spot that when they're riding? Is it something that you're looking at their feet or their hips, or is it something different?
Yeah, good point. I mean, feet and hips are both important things. I often just look at, if you think about the bottom bracket, and just look straight up. And if a rider's putting their weight nicely into the bottom bracket on the bike, they're most likely going to have the weight in more or less the right place.
You know what? It's funny enough, as a pro, I struggle with that. In hindsight, I think it was because the back end of my bike was too short. So I was really struggling for front wheel grip when it came to critical positions where I was fine most of the time, but when I crashed, it was always a front wheel washout. Yeah. And I hadn't worked out. I always thought I couldn't get enough weight onto it. So I was looking at bar height, fork, progression, sag, whatever. Nowadays, with movable geometry, I find that if I just drag the back end of my back out, i.e. make my chainstays longer, it then balances more weight to the front and I don't have to worry about my riding technique. That has done enough for me.
It helps massively, doesn't it? That the geometry of the bike, that as I call it, relationship between how the bike is and where you are stood on top of it is so important. I know in the motocross world, for example, I'm not into motocross, but from what I read is they literally move the engine, because the engine's the heavy bit in the motocross, each year or when they release new bikes, to get a better balance. The challenge with us is we've got this lump being our torso that we can too easily move around, can't we? So that has too much impact on where that weight goes into the bike.
And of course the rider's obviously, a lot heavier than the bike, but riders do come in different ways. So a lighter rider moving around the bike is going to make less of a difference, I suppose. How do you think the amateur rider knows if they are doing this or not? Does it manifest like with me, like the front wheel washes out, or is it something where they maybe don't know until they crash?
I think I would say they often don't know until they crash, to be fair. They're sort of unaware of it, because often when we coach people on that, they're almost quite surprised. They're like, well, aren't I going to go? I think terms like, aren't I going to go over the bars, is if I'm that far forward, Ollie, is the sort of words I hear. And I always sort of speak about it, it's like, well, you're not far forward, you're far central, if that's, you're in the middle of the bike. So that's the important thing. But yeah, the thing I think I see the most is that when they are further back, they then just rely too much on using just the rear brake. And probably another thing we'll speak about is this importance of front brake and balancing your brakes. But if you have no weight anywhere near it, you pull that, there's no grip.
Right, Ollie, I think you alluded to it then. So the second biggest problem, we're talking about the use of brakes and where weight is and getting different brakes to do different things. Do you think about your front and your brake differently when you ride?
I think this is something we can all think about, to be fair. When I do think about it, I actually notice I'm getting more heat into the front rotor and actually less heat into the rear rotor on my own riding. So when it's something I work on, I think this is a thing for every rider. It doesn't matter if you're world champion Charlie Hatton or somebody new to riding in the Forest of Dean. There's using some more of this front brake is definitely going to help, for sure.
And you're going to need weight on it and a reasonably soft, I say reasonably soft, but I've got much lower than my front tyre pressure because most of the time there isn't as much weight. It's not taking as many impacts either, to be fair, but you're going to need to get that front tyre working, and that includes traction, but using your weight on it as well.
Yeah, and when we say weight on it, I think there's two things that people get quite confused with here. Weight by just simply having your torso, your mass, like over it, you know, or over the middle of the bike, as we were talking about earlier, is how you get weight on it. We don't need to, as you brake, like pump the bars or anything like that to get the weight. It's purely just simply moving yourself a bit further forward, so there is some weight going into it. But yeah, it makes a hell of a difference. And then you will notice you can actually use it more. But it's understandable, right? That can potentially wash out and you're hitting the ground fast, or lock up and you're going over the bars. So, you know, there's this thing called fear, which impacts everyone from amateur through to professional riders, that make us do these things. So it's kind of, I always say it's understandable that you would want to do something in a certain way.
It's really interesting. I've done plenty of how to manual videos, and where you find people they move their body too far and it goes wrong, and they crash and they fear it. So then they limit how much they want to move. I guess learning to use your front brake and it not be the enemy is tricky for a lot of mountain bikers. It
really is tricky for a lot of mountain bikers. Yeah, it's the unspoken about art. I think this front brake. It's such an important thing, but then it comes to the fact that when you do use it, you can actually come off the rear brake a little bit. And this whole braking balance thing about it's not just about using it loads, it's about balancing it with your rear brake. A good drill to do is even just try and ride down a, maybe not too steep a chute, but a slightly slippery chute, and just use your front brake, and then do the same drill with just the rear brake. And you'll probably, it's pretty obvious, but if you just use your rear brake and it's very slippery, you pretty much won't stop. So it's a good understanding that the rear brake's helping you balance your front so that you can get traction with that front wheel and actually slow down, which is what we're after, right?
Right, when it comes to the professional side of things, you work with people like Brooke McDonald, Laurie Greenland, and you're working again with Joe Breeden on the team. And obviously you watch the racing and you see all these different riders. What's the thing that you've taken away from that and think, well, this could be something that the pros should maybe work on as well?
Yeah, I think that, naturally, technically they're all absolutely incredible, but the one thing you do notice is that they all ride differently. I always remember actually years ago, I rode to the top of the hill and I was in the middle or just slightly behind Greg Menard and Laurie Greenland pedalling up in Lenzerheide. It was at the World Champs a few years ago. And I remember looking, I thought, there's over a foot difference in height between those two guys. And I was like, they're going to come down this hill fundamentally the same speed, aren't they? Give or take a second. And I was like, wow, they can't be doing this game the same, And over the years, the thing I've sort of noticed, and I think the important thing for those guys, is to make sure that they have a bike setup, a kind of mindset / ride approach that complements their technique and their style.
Whereas someone like Laurie or Jackson is a slight rider on a bike that looks different.
Yeah, great example. They're perfect opposite examples, aren't they? They're more out of the bike, they're very light. They have a bike setup that's quite poppy, I suppose, if that's the right term, but it plays to their lightness that they work with. And also, and I don't know Jackson so well, but with Laurie, he works on being very calm in his approach. He'll try and calm himself down going into the start gate, control his emotions, and then ride in a calm way, which I know doesn't look it when he's going down the hill at breakneck speeds, but yeah, and it fits. And I think that's what you see the difference compared to maybe some other riders who don't have that nice fit of bike rider and technique approach.
So I guess the hard thing to sort of say is it's not a one size fits all. And actually the tricky part is every rider's got to work out what fits, how they might make their bike, because with the pro riders now, they can make their bikes fit around them. They can make along whatever it takes, they have the options to do it, I suppose. And your average rider maybe has to work that out for themselves. They don't have a performance coach, although they can use your services if they need to, but it's kind of tricky for an everyday rider to work out how their style, their mentality, their bike fits around them to get peak performance.
Yeah, it is. To be fair, it is tough for, say, an everyday rider who doesn't have the support. Obviously, these riders have teams, of mechanics and technical guys, and they do all the data analysis, and then they've obviously got people like me on track filming and analysing it. So they do have the ability to do that. I think if you were to sort of compare it to an amateur rider, it's maybe just simplifying all of the job, like maybe don't look at it into the detail they are, but do have a bit of a think about the type of rider you are. If you are a heavier rider that just wants to plough through sections, then set a bike up that is going to deal with, or even buy a bike, should I say, that deals with sections like that. Whereas if you want to have a slightly lighter style and a lighter approach, such as Laurie and Jackson, then set up a bike that's a little bit more in that kind of way, And
even for your average mountain bike, it could be simple as a lighter casing tyre versus someone who's a Bruce that can go into a downhill tyre or whatever, I suppose.
Yeah, literally, yeah. And it could be even just running a slightly slower rebound versus a faster rebound, or, some simple things.
Have you ever found a pro where you've given them advice, it seems obvious to you, think this could help you, and they've thought, nah, I am what I am?
Yeah, 100%. All the time. Okay. Yeah, but that's the job, isn't it? That's, I think, a coach to pro relationship is kind of that. It's like you can raise things and you can talk to them about it, but it's I always say they're the pro, right? Like they're the one having to go fast down that hill. They're taking the risks and they'll take the rewards. All we can do is make some advice and see some things. And trackside, totally, you can be wrong. It's just an opinion at the end of the day. It's about how that pro does it. So yeah, I'd rather a rider who comes, debates it, if you know what I mean. It says, hold on a minute, Ollie, that doesn't make sense, because it makes me question my theory more and makes them hopefully think through the theory some more. So it's a positive relationship, I think, having that, yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, Ollie. It's great to hear your perspective. I'm an old school coach. It's been out of the game for a while, so it's great to see what you've been working on with these riders as well coming up this season. That makes me super excited for some racing coming in, when is it? May, isn't it?
May, yeah. It's early this year at Fort Bill, so yeah, exciting times.
Right, thanks, Ollie.
Cheers, mate.